Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. So today we are going to proceed to another topic, which is chromatography. Okay, so basically where we talk about the chromatography, so basically chromatography is one of the separation technique. So there are many or several separation technique. For example, you have a filtration. Filtration is also one of them. And then another one, the one that you already learned before, which is regarding the solvent extraction. Okay, so when we talk about the chromatography is we have, for example, a mixture. Our aim is to separate the mixture. Okay, for example, in the mixture, there are several components involved, or molecules or atoms, the one that you want to separate. Okay, so in this course, you'll be learning in detail regarding two instruments that related to the chromatography, which are HPLC and also GC. But before we go through in detail, okay, so in this video, I will try to introduce a little bit on the introduction to the chromatography. What are important key points that related to the chromatography? Which are the first one is regarding the phases that involved in the chromatography. So we have a stationary phase and also mobile phase. So in this video, I will try to discuss in detail what are the difference between these two phases. Okay, and then you have, we call it as a type of the chromatography. So this is very important. Okay, so HPLC is one of them. GC is also one of them. So there are several types in the chromatography. And then, of course, you have to really know a little bit on the calculation that referring to the data, or we call it as a chromatogram, the data that coming out from the system of the chromatography. We call it as a chromatogram. Okay, how do you have to do the calculations? It's a very simple calculation. And the last one, a little bit on the theory of the separation. So for the theory of the separation, this one I will try to introduce or to give you the simple video that come from the YouTube, which is the animation video that make easier for you to understand more on the theory of the separation. Okay, so in this video, like I already mentioned, we will discuss more on the stationary phase and mobile phase. Okay, so basically, you are quite familiar with this one. So when we talk about the chromatography, our aim is to separate the components that contain in the sample or mixture. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. So it depends on the chromatography technique that you are using. Is it suitable with the application, right? Okay, so for example here, this is the simplest chromatography. You are quite familiar with this one. For example, you have a thin layer chromatography. Okay. So there are two phases that I already mentioned. The first one is the stationary phase, right? You have stationary phase. Okay, so you have to bear in your mind if one of the phase is not present or is not working in the system of the chromatography, so the separation cannot occur. Another one, you have mobile phase. So what are the difference between these two phases? Right? So when we talk about the stationary phase is basically the phase that doesn't go anywhere. Okay, it doesn't move. It will be staying in the system of the chromatography. Okay, so for this example, so you can see that you have a filter paper. So filter paper will be the stationary phase. So it will be staying in the system of the chromatography. Okay, throughout the separation process occurred. And then you have another one, you have a mobile phase. The name is mobile, so you know that it will be, we call it as a moving throughout the system, throughout the process. So in this example, you know that water, for example here you have water. Water is a mobile phase. Okay, so usually mobile phase is the phase that help the sample to travel along the stationary phase. So the mobile phase will bring your sample throughout the stationary phase, while the stationary phase will be staying in the system. Okay, so you have to really understand what are the difference between these two. Okay, so as we can see here, for example, you have a ink, right? In this ink, you know that there are several colors or dyes involved. Your aim is to separate, okay, to make a separation by introducing the separation technique, which is the chromatography, to see what are types of the colors involved. Okay, For example, you have a filter paper. So filter paper, you consider this one as a stationary phase, like I already mentioned, the one that doesn't go anywhere. Okay, and then you put the mixture here. So this is the one that you want to separate. And then in the beaker, you have the water. The water will act as a mobile phase, help the ink to travel along the stationary phase. Okay, towards the end, you can see that there are several, we call it as a spot colors based on the separation, right? So you can see these are the difference between the distance and so on. Okay, so as we can see here, why this is happening. So you know that when you are dealing with the chromatography, okay, you have the sample and then it will be separated into the several components, right? In these cases, for example, the color, based on the color, for example. But of course, you have to bear in your mind there will be forces, or we call it as the interaction happen between the component or the solid with the phases, either stationary phase or mobile phase. So this is very important. Okay, another important information here where we talk about the stationary phase. As we can see here, the separation occur in the stationary phase. So you know that when we talk about the chromatography, for example, you are dealing with the HPLC ke, GC ke, so where is the separation occur? So the separation occur in the stationary phase. Okay, so when we try to relate with the instrument, you know that stationary phase is a column, right? So you know that the separation will always occur in the stationary phase. Okay, the mobile phase is the phase, okay, that help to bring your analyte travel along the stationary phase. Okay, but of course, when we talk about the solvent, also have the polarity, for example. So there will be an interaction with the mobile phase also. Okay, so I hope that you really understand on this part, the difference, and also you know that the separation always occur in the stationary phase. Okay, so when we talk about the stationary phase and also mobile phase that relate with the chromatography, so you cannot, okay, run from the concept of the adsorption and also desorption. For example, so if I can draw here, so you have the stationary phase here, right? So this is the stationary phase, and then you have the mobile phase that bring your sample. Okay, so for example, you have a mixture. So in this mixture, you have several components. For example, you have star, and then you have circle, and then you have triangle, right? Okay, so once the mobile phase bring all these components, okay, for example, you have star here, and then you have circle, and then you have triangle. So you know that all of this, we call it as a concept of adsorption. Why? Because the interaction occur at the surface of the stationary phase. So mesti ada, we call it as the interaction occur. It's either hydrogen bonding, van der Waals, and so on. Okay, so it will adsorb, right? But you have to bear in your mind, because we want to look at the separation, all of them should going through the system, okay, coming out from the stationary phase. Okay, so all of the component after it has adsorbed onto the surface of the stationary phase, so it has to, we call it as a desorb back into the mobile phase. Okay, so I hope that you really understand on this one. Okay, dia tak akan selamanya adsorb and then stay in the air, in the surface. So after a few minutes dan sebagainya, after the interaction occur, and then the analyte will be desorbed back. So that's why we call it as a desorption. So once it's desorbed, so the mobile phase will travel along, okay, and then going out from the stationary phase. So as we can see here, that's the separation is occur. Okay, so it same goes. For example here, as we can see here, for example, we try to relate with the chromatogram. So you have the time, right? So this is the time, we call it as a retention time, and then you got a few peaks. Okay, this peak is referring to the triangle, this peak is referring to the circle, and then this peak referring to the star. So you know that the star will be coming out late as compared to the other two analyte, for example. Okay, so you know that you know from here, the concept is the adsorption is occur, and then it will be having strong interaction with stationary phase, right? As compared to the circle and also triangle. Okay, so once it have a strong interaction, so it will be retained more in the stationary phase before dissolve back into the mobile phase and then going out through the we call it as a, for example, when we relate with GC or HPLC into the detector to be detected, for example. Okay, so there must be an interaction. So when we talk about the interaction, we will discuss more on the type of the chromatography later. But in this video, I hope that you really understand on the stationary phase, mobile phase, and then the forces or interaction happen between analyte with the stationary and also mobile phase.